Good morning, everyone. Man, it's good to see the pews as full as they are. Is that bearing fruit? Is that what this is? Is this, huh? Is that what we call it? Huh? The results of. I do believe that to be the case. You know, in this passage that John read, this Romans 8:28, that we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God. We were talking in class this morning about how all of the Old Testament is written to prove two things. Number one, that God will rescue the righteous. Plain and simple. Now, if you understand that, understand it the way the Bible teaches it, doesn't mean that we're not ever going to suffer anything harmful. It's just not going to be that way. After all, Jesus died. Do you remember that, right? He died. Now, that's kind of harsh. God let him die. As a matter of fact, it was part of the plan, because that's kind of like Job, you know. Job was chosen to do something nobody else could do. He was chosen to demonstrate that you can be faithful to God. God will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able to bear. So like our great military, I'll tell you what, we've got some guys and gals that if they're called upon to do the job, they'll get it done. They'll get it done because they're capable and they've trained for it and they're ready for it. They're kind of special, you know. That's why we call them special forces, special ops. That's why we give them that elevated position of readiness and recognition. We know that they are capable. And I got to tell Daniel, I'm really looking forward to you getting back from Fort Benning, because I know Fort Benning. It's full of people that are hardcore. Hardcore. As a matter of fact, when I went in the Army, I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia. And it was hadn't been used as a training base for a long time. Fort Gordon was pretty obsolete. But at the time, they were using all of our other bases to train those Cubans that kind of didn't fare too well in the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba. Kind of tells you how old I am. But what was significant about that is that they brought paratroopers from Fort Benning to be our cadre. Oh, my goodness. I'm hoping you don't have the same thing, buddy, because they're going to wear you out. There's a special language that you learn. Special language. Get your hands out your pockets. I learned to get my hands out of my pockets. And a bunch of other things that I can't repeat right here. But it was all to do one thing. Prepare you. Prepare you for the future. Prepare you for what you might meet. Prepare you so that you'll be ready if you face it. And you'll have the ability to take care of business. I want us to go now to 1 Peter. And I want us to look at some thoughts that we have there. The Apostle Peter was a special individual. You remember that the Lord named him Peter. His name was Cephas. But the Lord gave him a nickname, just like the apostles gave Barnabas, or gave Joseph, a Levite of Cypriot birth, gave him the nickname Barnabas. Barnabas, it means son of encouragement, because this man was such an encouraging individual. I mean, he did things that just made everybody love him to death. Peter was, let's just say Peter was different. Peter was impetuous. Peter was the kind of person that if somebody was going to jump and do something, you could count on it being Peter. But he was kind of a hardhead. And thus the Lord gave him the name Cephas, or gave him the name Peter, Petros. Petros, which means rock. Doesn't mean stone, it means rock. It means the kind of rock that David went down to the creek in the Septuagint version of the Old Testament, went down to the creek in 1 Samuel and picked out 5 of them to put in his pouch for his sling. You don't pick to put in your sling, you pick that's what he did. He picked a bunch of these, one of which he used to kill Goliath. But it kind of says something about his personality. This bonehead? Stonehead, not stoner, but stonehead. He was kind of a hard-headed character. But one thing's for sure, you could count on him jumping when the time was right. So the Lord gave him the responsibility. He knew who it was going to be when they were all accused of being drunk on the day of Pentecost. He knew which one of them it would be that would jump up and say, "Hey, we're not drunk. It's only the 3rd hour of the day." 9 o'clock in the morning. Most nobody. I guess if it's 9 o'clock there, it's 5:30. No, 5 o'clock somewhere. But Peter was that kind of person. He would jump at anything. But now when Peter starts writing his letters, his personality shows in his letters. But he also shows some other things. He shows some maturity that he didn't have back then. Because you remember when he said, "Lord, all the rest of them might deny you, but I'm not going to. I'm strong enough, I won't do that." And then what happened? Before the cock crew, he had already denied Jesus 3 times, even cursing. Say, "I don't know that blankety blank." Now, that was him. That was that impetuous person that jumps first and then is afraid later. He's the one that jumped out of the boat. "Let me come to you, Lord." And he's over the side of the boat. And then he looks around and sees the danger. He starts sinking. But boy, he learned some lessons in that. So, this Apostle Peter, who was so concerned about John, the Lord said something about John. It sounded like he might not die. Told Peter he was going to die and how he was going to die. He told him that they're going to tie you up and make you go somewhere where you don't want to go. You're going to suffer for me. And then Peter said, "Well, what about him?" Pointing to John. And the Lord had to correct old bonehead there for a minute. He said, "What is it to you if I want to have him live forever? What does that matter to you? I'm dealing with you and I'm dealing with him." But I want you to read what Peter writes beginning in chapter 1 and verse 17. This is his first letter to the diaspora. The Christians, the Jewish Christians that were scattered all over the world because of one man named Saul of Tarsus, that would later become the Apostle Paul. He writes this, he says, "If you address as Father the one who impartially judges according to each man's work, conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your stay on earth." Now, fear doesn't necessarily mean trembling. Because John talks about, later on, this same John that the Lord really, really appreciated, his best friend. The one John says, the one whom Jesus loved. He loved them all, but this man was really special. Special enough that the Lord says, on the cross, he says to his mother, woman, behold your son. And then to John he says, behold your mother. He had brothers. He had sisters, but he turns the care of his mother over to this disciple. Now, Peter says, conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your stay on earth. John later on in 1 John chapter 4 says, fear doesn't make you what you ought to be. Love casts out fear. And love is one of those things that does perfect you. It makes you what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be if you're doing what you do out of fear. Now, understand that Proverbs also says that fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. I mean, you start that way. I don't know of anybody that I've ever dealt with that didn't obey the gospel because of fear. Started out that way, afraid of dying, afraid of what comes after death, afraid of what they've done in their past, afraid. But that doesn't perfect a person. What does perfect a person, what makes us what we ought to be, is this four-letter word that we've been talking about for weeks now, this word called love. The perfect motivation. The motivation that will dispel any kind of worry about why a person is doing what they're doing. You ever had somebody do something nice for you and you went, I wonder what that's all about? I've had that many, many times. I've had people look at me that way because they don't really trust me. They're worried about why I'm trying to weasel in here. But perfect love, man, I'll tell you what, it dispels that. It gets rid of fear coming and going. Now, what Peter is saying, let's back up and read this again. He says, if you address as Father, the one who impartially judges according to each man's work. Now, we talked last week about that work, about what the work of a Christian is. Is it producing more Christians? Is that what we're supposed to be doing? Or are we supposed to be doing what we do and that causes these other things? Let's read on. He says, conduct yourselves in fear during your time of your stay on earth, knowing that you were not redeemed with perishable things like silver and gold from your futile way of life inherited from your fathers, but with the precious blood of a lamb, unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ, the blood of Jesus. For he was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but has appeared in these last times for the sake of you, who through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. We've been studying in the prophets, and we've been studying about the kings. Going back to David and Saul and seeing what it was that caused them to leave God, what it was that caused God to be upset and angry with them. And it's not believing in him. The very thing, stop and think for a minute about Adam and Eve. I wonder how long that took. I'm always trying to put the pieces together and fully understand the picture. I've never understood really the story of Adam and Eve and what happened there. I understand that she saw something that she wanted and someone came and gave her a reason to go ahead and do what she already wanted to do. I understand that. But I'm trying to figure out how I fit into that same picture. I'm trying to figure out how it is that I have the tendency to do the same thing that they did. Where is it that I don't show my appreciation for what God has done for me? Or where is it that I don't see what God has done for me? I'm sure that they had the most perfect existence that there could possibly be, and yet it wasn't enough for them. Was it that one thing that God said, I don't want you to do that? Was that what upset the apple cart? Apple cart? Betty's giving me that snake eye again. I know it was an apple. I know it was. Because when Adam swallowed it, it stuck right there and it became that stuck in his craw, realizing how much it cost him. It was his Adam's apple. It's where we got the name. Now, let's get past that. Read what Peter says here. He says, since you have, verse 22, since you have, in obedience to the truth, purified your souls, obedience to the truth. There's an action involved here that Peter says purified their souls. Interesting. I know that we're not saved by works. Nobody will ever convince me that we are saved by being valuable to God. We don't ever get in the plus column with the things that we do. We don't. Don't anybody think that we're saved by works. But does that mean we're saved without anything? Without doing anything? He says, you have, in obedience to the truth, purified your souls. For what purpose? For what purpose were we purified, cleaned up, and put back on the shelf? He says, for a sincere love of the brethren. That's why. A sincere love of the brethren. Listen, we got to talk about that word. The word sincere. I got in trouble preaching about this word one time because I just kind of lost my train of thought, and I used an illustration that I lost everybody. But the word means without wax. Without wax. Sincere means without wax. Can you figure out why that is a word that means you're what you appear to be? It's the word that they used to use in Roman times, in Greek times, for marble that had no flaws in it. Because if you're buying marble so that you can carve something, cut away parts of it and have a statue there, you don't want a big crack running through it. So what the unscrupulous used marble salesman would do is they would bondo it with wax. And they would polish that over, and you could look at it, and you could never tell there was a flaw in that marble, because it just looked like all the rest of the marble. Until you hit it with a chisel. Until you put some stress where you needed to put it. And then a big old chunk would fall off, and you would know, I got bit by that insincere marble and marble salesman. No wax. That's what we need, Christians with no wax. I won't say the rest of it. I never did get my congregation back that time. But we need to be pure without any fillers. And that's what he's saying here. We've been purified by our actions, by our acceptance of Jesus. And our acceptance of what he says is the entry. And then we've had that happen to us for this reason. So that we can start out giving sincere love to the brethren. That's why the terminology is used over and over again about how we are a unit, how we're one, how we are a body. Do you ever notice how the body functions? If you've got a part of you that hurts, Rhonda, that knee, what does the rest of your body do when you try to walk on that? The rest of your body makes up for that weakness. The rest of your body stands in for it. I don't care what part of you hurts. The rest of your body is going to help that, because next time it might be that part that needs it. And it's interesting that even when everything works right, did you realize that you take a step and that one part, it winds up that your big toe is the last thing holding everything up for the rest of the body. You try not having a big toe or having it smushed, which is why they try to get everybody to wear steel-toed boots. Because you don't do well without a big toe. Because eventually every bit of your weight is going to be on that thing. But that's the way the whole body is. The whole body operates that way and needs to do so in order for us to function the way we're supposed to. That, folks, really is a very good illustration of what sincere love really is. Each one of us taking the other's weight when it's necessary. No thanks necessary. We're going to receive our thanks, but we don't have... You know, it's like... I get a little upset when somebody has to tell me every good deed they do. I wonder, what is it that's going on here? When somebody tells me every good thing they've done, I worry about that. I worry about it if I have to get credit for everything that I do. If I have to make sure that somebody knows I did that great thing. Sometimes the greatest acts of love are the anonymous ones. I don't know whether I've ever told you. I think I probably have. Bear with me. When I was in my first preaching job, it was notoriously low paid. That's why I've almost always had a separate job to make a living. But I came into the office one day, and underneath the desk cover thing, there was a little envelope. I thought, that's interesting. I pulled that out, and it had my name on it. And in block letters, not a signature or anything, it was just block letters. And inside was a note that said, I know you need this. It was $100. That was a lot of money back then, $100. And you know, I never did find out who did it. That was one of the most astounding gifts I ever got. Because nobody was trying to get me to do anything. Nobody was trying to pry me in a certain direction. Nobody was wanting credit for it. They did it out of pure, absolute, unadulterated, sincere love. I know you need this. Man, I was sneaky. I went around asking people to write down what they needed. I wanted to compare the letters and see if I could find out who did. I never did find out. What I did find out, though, is that there are people who will be your knee for you when you need it, will be your big toe for you when you need it. Those are acts of love that produce fruit. I've been trying to live up to that ever since. That's what that does for me. These anonymous, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you need to know who did it. But those things are what I read in this right here. He says, for you have been born again, not of seed. Notice that, seed. We've been talking about how the fruit comes. It comes from seed. And it doesn't reproduce like one for one for one. It's one seed and 100, and then 100 from each one of those, and then 100 from each one of those. If it's done properly, if you plant it, and if you water it, and if you give it the right attention, it will bring forth this cornucopia of results, this fruit of the Spirit, the love, the joy, the peace, the patience that comes from being what we're supposed to be. You do all of those things out of genuine concern for God and each other. That's what makes the Lord's body grow. It's not making someone sit down and pounding your doctrine into their head. It's giving them the doctrine of Jesus Christ and letting it work. We've got entirely too many doctrines out there. We need to come back to the one who saves the lost, that does save the lost. The words that Jesus spoke. I'm convinced that what we need to do today is we need to go back and start looking at how Jesus walked, how he talked, how he felt compassion, when he felt compassion, who he felt it for, how he responded to their needs. And do that as individuals and as a church. Don't go to the epistles to find out how the church should function. That's okay. But understanding how the head directed his body while he was here on this earth is the way that we should learn how Christ Jesus wants us to behave. Not only as individual parts of his body, but as his body, the church. There's so many more things I want to talk to you about, but we're out of time this morning. I would hope that what we can do is that we can learn how God feels about things. Let's read the prophets and about the kings. Let's understand what they did that upset God so badly that he was ready to destroy them. Let's understand the emotions that God not only has, but that he gave to us that we have to learn how to control. And let's put those things to work. Be instruments of God for righteousness instead of performing the deeds of the flesh, which plant seeds as well. Seeds of discord and seeds of factionism and seeds of destruction. If you know what you need to do to become a Christian, to be a Christian, or to restore yourself as one of God's people, won't you come while we stand and sing the song that's been announced?